Mr Deputy Speaker, thank you. I'm grateful for the opportunity to contribute to this debate. And it is not something I'm recognised for praising front bench of either side. But I must say I was pleased that on both sides that there genuinely seemed to be a workmanlike approach to this debate. Further, I hope that there is a genuine consensus that this debate is about getting people back to work rather than more stereotypical debate where we labour on about cuts to welfare benefits, etc., etc. And I think the premise is genuinely accepted about getting people back to work. At moments during the debate, I have wondered if members opposite were fair weather friends of that argument or not. But I think that I am generous in assuming, I hope, that this is the main goal. Now, look, just to put a little bit of context before I turn to some specifics, I think it is in that spirit that in 2010 there was a situation where something like 5 million people were effectively trapped on out-of-work benefits, something like 12% of the working age population. Now, it's also true that many of those people, about 1.5 million, had been receiving out-of-work benefits for a considerable period of time, which meant that we were dealing not just with a personal problem, obviously individual to each one of those, but a cultural problem as well, demanding change to help move us from a life of dependency to one of independence. Reforming welfare is not as much about the process as driving a cultural change. And we're fighting something which has become intergenerational and almost institutional. It is worklessness and welfare dependency, which in many ways are two evils that are very close together. It's not something that simply develops in difficult economic times. We have enjoyed long periods of growth. And yet 11% of the working age population, some 4 million people, were on out-of-work benefits during the years of growth. Now, it's interesting, although worrying, that during the last economic boom, employment rose by something like 2.5 million. Yet a great deal of this, was in the public sector, and more than half of that was accounted for by non-UK nationals. Now, this is not a debate about immigration. It's not a point I'm trying to make, except to register the fact that it reminds us of what the huge challenge is that is facing us in driving the welfare system to help put people back into work. So, if you like, the shift now going from handouts, being at the very centre of our welfare centre, it's about putting work and not handouts first. I know that the last government, we could look over the period of their government and say they continually grew the welfare state. It's a fact, it happened, and I would suggest they did so with entirely the right intentions. But it has now led to this generational and cultural issue. Indeed, we can, and I think we can alter this cultural perception so that working becomes something to aspire to, as opposed to becoming, shall we say, the exception in many families. In that context, I'd just like to address one or two of the concerns that have been raised, starting, if I may, with the question of managing money and monthly payments, because this is something that is obviously a practical need. If you're going to go and take a job, if you were unemployed and you went straight into a job, there's a very high chance you will end up getting paid on a monthly basis, and there's not many employers who are actually going to give you an advance for a new employee. I will give way.
Many people who work in part-time jobs, particularly women, are still paid on a weekly basis. It's really not unusual among lower-paid workers.
For her intervention, and that's why I chose my words very carefully. Many people will. And I think the risk of this debate is there's almost an assumption that where there is a group of individuals, be it, as the Honourable Lady has suggested, or those who are unfamiliar with computers, that we almost let the whole programme be driven by a section or a group which may be in the minority, but nonetheless significant. And I don't think that's the right approach. I turn the telescope round and look at the other way and help those groups aspire to situations where they have control, in this case over their money, on a monthly basis, or in the case of computers, where they can aspire to become computer literate. And I think that's the difference in emphasis I would make. And I see the lady shrug a heavy sigh. I offer her that in good in the spirit of intent that we all want to improve people's qualities of lives and their opportunities to go forward. But can I also, there's another point about managing the money. Managing the money is also about individual responsibility. And there has been building up almost the state will look after me and the state will do this for me. And we can't do that anymore. It's wrong. It's not encouraging the right self-motivation to take responsibility when we can for our lives. So I think that there is also both the practical and, shall we say, the moral drive to try and increase personal dependency. Turning to the computer argument, which I think is very valid, particularly where the broadband issues are in question. I think that is an issue. I was pleased that the ministers have recognised this and will be trying to put in place access to computers to overcome that. We talked in terms of percentages, and I looked at the, and I'm pleased to say, slightly diminishing job seeker allowance claimants in my constituency, which are roughly around 3,500. Now, what we're really saying is we call into question the proposed universal credit because actually 700 of those people may not be able to get access to or use a computer. And I would argue, actually, if the 2,800 can do it, we should work harder to help the 700 achieve it. Perhaps it's, again, another way of looking at the problem. Now, I come here very, very, very cautious, like others, about IT systems. In my own company, I remember when I worked there that we used to plan for 20,000 and the bill often came in a lot higher and with few of the results that we needed. It's life, and when it comes to government, I agree, it is quite daunting when we see some of the projects that have gone wrong in the past. But I do applaud the approach, and I think the House gives credit rightly here, that this is not a big bang effect for a computer system that we are going to launch for day one. It is being trialled. I think it's correct that it's been trialled. It has been done in stages, and I think it's fair to give credit to the Secretary of State and his team that they have learnt from the lessons of the past to help try and drive good value. And frankly, I wish him well in his task, as I'm sure the whole of this House do. So in conclusion, whilst I note that there are some concerns on the other side, I think in the context and perspective of the overall goal, they are manageable.
Frank Field.